I'm what you might call a mild Persona fan. I started with 4, played 5 when it came out, but I never touched any of the core Shin Megami Tensei games, and never played 3 until Persona 3 Reload came out this year. Despite not having dug that deep into the series, I like the Persona games I've played quite a bit. I've played through 4 twice, played 5 multiple times, and Giant Bomb's Persona 4 Endurance Run is common comfort viewing for me. This is all to say that I have a deep appreciation for the series, but that my appreciation doesn't derive from its expansive lore or any other aspect of Persona as like a franchise property. I don't really enjoy the combat either, or the Persona fusing. I'm also put off by the mysticism and ahistoricism of Carl Jung's psychoanalysis, so I don't really go for the psychological metaphysics which undergird the series either.
Think of it as the collective unconscious. No, never mind. You wouldn't understand that.
No, what draws me to the Persona games is their structure. In the midst of all the JRPG combat and psychological metaphysical magic stuff, these games let you live out a relatively normal life, where you perform activities that boost your social stats and progress through character-driven side stories. And what this structure provides is a fantasy where you get to live a completely productive and fulfilling life. Every day you get to pick a couple of activities, hang out with friends, studying, eating, watching TV, whatever. And everything you do contributes to a quantifiable betterment of your avatar, of your character. That burger gives you courage. Studying, you're not going to forget any of that. It contributes unwaveringly to your generic knowledge stat. Hang out with friends, that makes you and them better at the JRPG combat. Really, what Persona excels at is taking the familiar grind of the JRPG and applying it to daily life. These games let you live out a fantasy where aging and development and friendship all abide by a logic of accrual. Everything you do makes you better. You have to try very, very hard to waste a day in Persona. So what I'm describing is a very ideologically fraught fantasy. Basically what I'm describing is being a good capitalist subject, where pleasure and productivity are completely intertwined. But let's not think about that for a minute, outside of accepting that we live in a capitalist society, and we're expected to some extent to internalize a relationship between productivity and happiness. I, personally, am precariously employed, and I tend toward depression. I'll have empty days where I get nothing done, where I can't bring myself to do much else aside from stare at a wall and curse the passage of time. And I blame myself in those moments for wasting my life. What Persona provides is a structure that simulates a productive schedule, where your avatar is never so depressed that he willfully lets a day go by. It's a fantasy of never being tired, but never being too sad to move, where no day is empty. And because that fraught fantasy is why I enjoy the Persona games I've played, I found myself being really turned off by the last couple of months of Persona 3 Reload. This is not me saying I responded negatively to the game's darker tone. I knew the fate of Persona 3's protagonist going in, so I had a sense of what to expect. No, what really got me was how empty the days started to feel. Maybe I was missing something, but at a certain point, I had maxed out every social stat. I had become a smooth-talking, badass genius. The nighttime social links were done, and the game provides you with enough easy access to SP refilling items that getting through Persona 3's one massive dungeon, Tartarus, is very easy to do efficiently. So I hit this period where at night I would have absolutely nothing to do. No social stats to build, no social link to finish, no tower to climb. Being too efficient in the first 4/5 of the game led me to a crisis in its final act, where I suddenly didn't have an optimal choice of how to spend my time. There was nothing left that could benefit me. The pleasure of pure productivity was gone, and instead I spent half of my days idling away, having interactions with no gameplay benefit, waiting for the end. And it sucked. The feeling of my actions having no purpose, of time slipping away, that precise feeling I play the Persona games to avoid took over the whole experience. But I sat with that discomfort for a bit, and after a while I started to find it really interesting. And this is my short thought for you. Persona 3 Reload is a valuable representation of what we might call the apocalyptic sensibility of everyday life. And I don't mean everyday life in the game, I mean in our real lives. I'm going to breeze through the plot of Persona 3 Reload really quick. If you've gotten this far, you've noticed that I'm presuming some familiarity with the game, or at least the series, already. So basically, in Persona 3 Reload, you and some high school friends fight otherworldly beings called shadows, which emerge from a tower that only exists during the quote-unquote dark hour, an hour which occurs every midnight and exists between days. The shadows seem to be responsible for something of a pandemic called apathy syndrome, where people become zombie-like and uncaring of their surroundings. In other words, they become extremely apathetic. You go about your days fighting shadows for several months, until it's revealed that your activities have not been fighting apathy syndrome, but worsening it severely. Inadvertently, you've accelerated the coming of the apocalypse by summoning the god of death named Nyx. The coming of Nyx kicks apathy syndrome into overdrive, initiating an apocalypse where humanity collectively loses its will to live. And so, in the final month of the game, you walk around formerly bustling areas and see that they're filled with shambling corpses of individuals, barely moving, barely speaking. The sidewalks are dirtier, filled with trash. The people you can talk to seem either resigned or deluded. The vibes, if you will, are fucked. And what do you do in this situation, O protagonist of Persona 3? Well, you do the same shit you've always done. The coming apocalypse, and the apocalyptic sensibility which has taken over all of Tatsumi Port Island, doesn't alter the basic Persona structure at all. You wake up, hang out with someone, and then find a way to kill time at night. Everything you're doing feels doubly pointless in the game's final month, because at this point, you have very little left to build toward. I finished Tartarus' final block in 2 nights. As I said, all of my stats were full, and every nighttime social link was finished. When there was nothing to do during the day, I'd go to work at a movie theater, because the only thing I could think to do that was useful was make small amounts of cash. At night, I'd repeat social events with my squad mates, making food and having coffee, even though there were few new story interactions and minimal further gameplay benefits. Persona 3 Reload ends by putting you in a holding pattern, biding time, where the only thing you can do in the face of the end of the world is pretend it isn't coming. Keep going to work, keep going to school. And when you have nothing more to gain from doing so, when your income at the movie theater is minimal, when you have no more stats to boost, you feel how empty the cycle of daily life is. The pointless repetition. Persona 3, very accidentally I think, strips its structure of its rewarding sense of progression at the precise moment it calls the future into question. The end of the world in the game's story happens to coincide with the moment the game's grind comes to a halt. But the game keeps going, even though your stats stop going up. So you feel held in place, held in stasis, doing the same shit until the inevitable end. And this, to me, reflects something very real about our daily lives. We live in a world where things are getting worse. Collectively, people are losing faith in the future. The job market is brutal. We've been watching a US-backed genocide unfold in Gaza. Climate change is still a thing that is slowly but surely worsening our conditions of existence. We make less money and our money buys less. There is widespread dissatisfaction with the state of the world, for good reason. But what do we do in response? The same shit we always do. We have to go to work because we have to believe in the future. We have no choice but to pretend that things aren't getting worse because we feel there is no other option. It's like an enforced optimism, a faith we're required to have, because an alternative where we allow ourselves to be unproductive leads to individual immiseration. Immiseration in the form of houselessness, a lack of health insurance, you name it. No matter the state of the world, the rent always comes due. And Persona 3 Reload accidentally shows us how jarring that optimism is. You walk around town in January and a mournful little tune plays, suggestive of the worsening of things, suggestive of the coming end of the world. But when you go to work or start a social link, the boisterous music kicks back in, momentarily erasing any amount of pessimism. You eat that ramen. You sell those popcorn buckets. Keep biding time. What else do you have? So, by simultaneously confronting you with the end of the world and giving you very little meaningful to do in its final act, Persona 3 Reload accidentally represents to us the emptiness of its own cycle of productivity, which also shows us the emptiness of our own productivity in the face of the state of things today. But we're forced to believe in the future because we need to make money. We can't stop to acknowledge, individually or collectively, the things that are intolerable about the world. Because if we stopped working and performing our little daily tasks to address those things, we'd lose our income, our safety, and eventually our lives. Believing in the future is not a virtue in the real world. Not really. It's something that's forced upon us. We go to work today to make sure we have enough to get by tomorrow. And so it's a problem for me that one of Persona 3's big morals is to believe in the future, no matter what. The fact that in the face of the apocalypse, everyone tells you to start planning your career, to think about college exams, is to me a reflection of the productivist fantasy that Persona offers. Even at the end of the world, the best thing you can do, the game seems to say, is deny that end by insisting on the continuation of the present state of things. It's like saying climate disaster is coming, sure, but it would be unethical of me to do anything but focus on my job. The philosophy of the game's minor villains, Strega, is that you should live in the moment. Somehow, in the face of the end, taking pleasure in the immediate moment is a bad thing, according to Persona 3. And that's an argument that I admit I have trouble following. Of course, to give credit where credit's due, Persona 3's protagonists' justification for their faith in the future is that they can use the power of friendship to kill God. Through the power of fate, chance, and good old determination, you and your buddies defeat Nyx and cancel the apocalypse. And fair enough. I guess if I could do that, I'd also have greater faith in myself and the future of mankind. Look, I'm not going to get mad at a JRPG for being a JRPG. But it goes without saying that there is no elder god coming to kill us all in the real world. The horrors we face are of our own making, and there's no boss fight against rising sea levels and the military-industrial complex. But I don't want to end on a complete downer. Instead, I'd like to mirror the ambivalence and complexity of Persona 3 itself. So, at the end of the video here, let's think two things at once. First, the trope of killing gods simplifies resistance to real-world problems by making resistance into a silly spectacle. Let's just agree on that. But secondly, killing God is an expression of a desire to make a change in the world that seems impossible. And is it really so bad to want that? Killing God is a trope that provides us the pleasure of fighting the manifestation of a concept, of being able to stare something large and unknowable directly in the face and reject it. And this is the complexity of Persona 3's representation of the end of the world. It's fraught, but it expresses a desire for what I think is something good. It's worth acknowledging that Persona 3 offers us a fantasy of productivity, but then it disrupts it, and willingly or not, shows us how empty that fantasy is. And Persona 3, uniquely for these JRPGs where you find and kill God, also tells a story of self-sacrifice. Your character does not survive killing the final boss. You kill God and prevent the end of the world only through an act of martyrdom. So, at the last minute, Persona 3 makes its optimistic and kind of productivist belief in the future more complex than it might have been otherwise. Believe in the future, the game says, even if it's a future you might not see. Believe in the future on the condition that you're willing to give your life for it. Being willing to give your life for something entails, inherently, the will to opt out of the normal cycles of daily life. The cycles of productivity, of blind optimism. This is all a way of saying that in Persona 3, I see the spark of self-critique, a way out of the fantasy of productivity that no other Persona game has really offered. A different kind of optimism. A belief in the future that expresses itself in opting out of the future. I don't want to say exactly that we all need to go out and die for a good cause. Or maybe we do. I don't really know, if I'm being honest. But what I will say definitively is this: that a representation of martyrdom in a video game like Persona 3, where our real lives are not actually at stake, gives us a chance to imagine a form of optimism about the future, in which the future is irrevocably different from our current experience. Where the future is not a continuation of what already is, but something totally different. Something unknown, frightening, and promising in equal measure.